Hey everybody, John the Other here, obviously. Now, I have tried to make it a practice on my channel not to deal with AVFM related drama. I did in the past do a couple of videos about them, but those were in response to attacks, so I just felt I had to at least refute, if somebody's telling obvious lies that are refutable by evidence on their own site, I would respond. But I've recently just stayed away from that. But the article that has just been published, it's too fantastic, it's too magnificent, it's too beautiful to leave it alone. It's like a ripe, beautiful, juicy piece of fruit hanging on a low branch, and I can't resist it. It's you'll see. If you haven't read the article already, you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm going to do a complete reading and my commentary. Now, I started to do that before, and then I started wandering. My commentary was wandering over the place, and it was going to obviously be a really, really long video. So I actually wrote out everything that I wanted to say to try to keep myself at least somewhat consistent and on point. And in spite of this very long and rambly preamble, we're still going to try to do that. The article is called Concerning Concern Trolls. And he puts in a couple of, and it's written by Paul. And he puts in a couple of pseudo semi-quotes. They're not real quotes, they're like typifying quotes. First one is, "You catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar," attributed to the original concern troll. And then the response is, "You want flies, you can have them," the original MHRA. And so it appears that Paul Elam, publisher of AVFM, has published his own letter of resignation. On March 9th, AVFM ran an article of Paul's called Concerning Concern Trolls, which superficially addressed what he's characterizing with that title. Of course, the article addresses the concern expressed by other members of the men's movement and by members of the mainstream that Paul's site and his organization is doing nothing of substance, beyond raising a lot of money to keep the insides of Paul's pockets warm. Where is the activism? That has been the question, and Paul has answered. He begins with the following. "One thing we get around here is people who come in either feeling or feigning support for the men's movement, but who nonetheless more closely resemble concern trolls than men's human rights activists, MHRAs. And then he says, I take that back, they more closely resemble just about anything in the known universe than MHRAs. Now that's a filler sentence. It adds nothing to the paragraph, and Paul's article is 1,400 words long, which, as we go through it, we're going to keep coming back to. There's a lot of long-winded and empty rhetoric which doesn't actually say anything, and that's a bit sad because this guy used to be able to write. And he continues, saying, "They," that's the concern trolls, "often hit the site in waves, and we have been surfing around here since my post busting the National Organization for Women, red-handed dumping their public record of lobbying for government-enforced gender roles." Okay, there's some justifiable bragging going on. They wrote an article about the National Organization for Women's Activism. Writing articles is what people with blogs do, so don't strain yourself while you're patting yourself on the back, and I will grant that some research went into that, but that's great. Do more of that. But back to Paul's resignation letter, which is what I'm calling this. He says, "So I figure while our movingly concerned visitors are here, it would be a good time to remind them what the men's movement, at least what it is here, is about. I mean, seeing as most of them want to define it for us, I thought it might be helpful. I know, it is above and beyond on my part, but that's just the kind of guy I am. That's how I roll." Actually, I think people mostly define their own part in the men's movement, much of which is just blogging. But as an organization with a really big platform and a lot of exposure and a lot of money relative to everybody else in the movement, I guess they expected you to put some of that money and some of that reach to effective purpose, to do something in the real world. And I used to think that as well. Silly me. But Paul continues. "So what is this thing we call the men's rights movement, or men's human rights movement? How do we measure success? What do we think is appropriate tone and content for our message, and why? What is it exactly that we want to do?" That's the question everybody is asking. Of course, in Paul's article, he relates that question in 3 different ways, one after the other, and really this is how he puffed the article up to 1,400 words. There's a lot of air here, and a lot of not much substance. And if you need an example of that, here we go with the next sentence. He says, "Well, I can best start by telling you what it is not, from my own personal point of view." That whole sentence could be cut. I mean, Didn't anybody edit this fluff before they hit the publish button? Paul continues to say, it's not about passing a Violence Against Men Act or any other form of government reliance on justice and personal liberty. And that is a really strange thing to say, because while they're using the H in the acronym MHRM, it's not, according to AVFM, just the men's rights movement, it's the men's human rights movement. And to understand the significance of this, you have to compare human rights to civil rights. Human rights is a legal construct which enables government to intervene in people's lives, while civil rights is almost the opposite construct, being the limitation of government to involve itself in the business of individuals. But Paul uses the nomenclature human rights movement while in this article explicitly stating that he seeks no involvement or legislation or legal reform or pursuit of the goals of this human rights movement. These terminologies and positional statements are incompatible with one another and incoherent. But he continues, I, Paul Elam, am not running for office. That's a good thing, because after the drubbing that he took from GQ and from BuzzFeed, this dude couldn't get himself elected as the city dog catcher. But that statement, even funny as it is really just more filler. He further says, I don't give a fudgesicle or a rat's ash, A-S-H, who likes me and who doesn't. Fudgesicle and rat's ash, A-S-H. It's the non-swearing, kindly old grandpa act that we're getting now. No more F-bombs anymore, huh? Please tell me how unconcerned you are with public perception again while you're saying things like fudgesicle and ash. Jesus. And here comes more filler. He says, I'm not looking for a men's rights parade on Men's Rights Victory Day in Washington, D.C. I am not looking for mainstream acceptance of the idea that men are human beings. Not looking for public acceptance? Oh, Nigerian, please. But he's not done yet. Saying the exact same thing over and over. Did I mention this article is mostly filler? He says next, there are no plans to form a committee for research for testicular cancer or to build a men's shelter. At least there are no plans for a men's shelter anymore. Not after Paul handed the money over to a female welfare grifter who he hadn't vetted, and she spent the Earl Silverman money on a minivan to drive her kids to soccer practice, and he didn't learn from that. But he continues saying, AVFM does not have a program to reform the family courts. And that was actually news to me because they used to have a judicial activism program when I was still working at the site. But to continue, Paul also says, of all the things I do not care about, and the list is endless, the concerns of others about how I choose to express myself is so low you could use it for a urinal target. Which I think a lot of people are going to do. Did I mention there's a lot of filler in this article? Don't worry, there is some gold buried amongst all this fluff, and we're coming to some of that now. The article next says, and this is Paul, oh, and by my saying I don't care about concerned trolls who identify as MHRA, I mean to say I am not invested in making it easy for morally weak group identity junkies to stand up and say they support men's rights. You mean like female chameleons who swoop in and repaint themselves with some MRA talking points, and then you give them masthead titles, which happens to be one of the main complaints against bad policy decisions of the site in the last 3 years. Oops! So you're not interested in doing that. Okay, that's a good one. But here comes the gold. Ready? The next thing he says is, you MHRAs who are running around whining about how nice and accommodating we should be are just cowards. Is Paul talking here about his very own prodigal son and golden-haired boy, Sage Gerard? Because that statement about being nice and accommodating is the basis for Sage and Paul teaming up and tone policing one of the major contributors who was eventually fired and banned from the site for being too much of an asshole for them to tolerate. I'm talking about myself, for those of you who didn't know. Oh, Paul, you just called yourself a coward. But he's not done yet. The article continues. This movement came to be necessary because of the fortitude deficient, and it won't be pushed forward with the burden of protecting the same. This is another filler sentence. And it happens to express the opposite of the direction towards political correctness that the site has been pursuing for a couple of years now. And Paul continues on to say, you want to know what this movement is about? It's very, very simple in my opinion. The MHRM I envision is about one simple thing, talking without fear or capitulation. As long as you don't offend Paul or his appointed political conformity officer, Happy on the banhammer Suze. Oh yes, you can talk without fear as long as you stay strictly on the site's talking points. And at this point in my reading of the article, before I began to write these responses, it became obvious to me that Paul is trolling us here. He's trolling all of us. Nobody can be so unaware that they're directly contradicting their own demonstrated policies to such a degree. But since the goal here is quite obviously some kind of a Baroque self-parody, what kind of a party pooper would I be to interfere? Onward, brothers, onward! Back to the article. He says, seriously, that is it. This is about nothing more than people talking to each other openly and freely in a world that does not want them to. Openly and freely as long as Driver Seuss doesn't swing the banhammer, right? Honestly, I feel cheap. This is just too easy to pick apart. What else, Paul? Neither I nor AVFM has a legislative agenda nor any politicians to endorse, nor lobbying to accomplish, because none of that is of any value in a society that still refuses to accept reality. This would be another unnecessary and empty of meaning filler sentence, except that we still have the repeated use of the phrase men's human rights movement, which, separate from the pursuit of civil rights, is an ongoing declaration and statement of intention to invite government to act on the behalf of whoever you pursue under, or of whatever you pursue under the human rights banner. But maybe I'm just being picky about words having meanings. I am, after all, somewhat out of step, being a modernist and not a postmodernist in the year of our Lord 2015. The article continues. Sure, if you look at our mission statement, you will see many items that will require political and judicial remedy to ultimately accomplish. That, however, is not our job at A Voice for Men to accomplish directly. And with that assertion, Paul Elam has, in public, in text, just abrogated his own site and his own organization's mission statement. He says our job is to push society to a place that is able to sustain a narrative change that will in turn lead to sustained problem solving. In case you were wondering, this is another filler statement. It's put there to puff this article up to its 1,400 words. But it doesn't say anything of substance. He continues. So relax, concernies. It's all good. Sorry, we got this, so you don't have to. Seriously, the guy has to be trolling. He just finished saying his own mission statement is a pile of crap, and his real goal is to do the same as every other blog in the entire world, which is to do nothing except blog. We got this. That's what he says. Got what? There's nothing going on here. The article we're reading just finished saying so, and he continues on to say, at least have the courtesy to think about that before you come in here with your Starbucks wisdom spreading the word we like you are one of us. You're not. But you are welcome to hang out and learn. So they're doing nothing. But they are, by a sort of a strange interior logic, also an elite somehow. And we are invited to learn from them how to talk or blog or have a really vigorous monologue inside of an echo chamber. Shut up, RBK. I know we're being trolled. The article continues saying, meanwhile, we are humming right along at a 24-carat success rate in everything we set out to do. Everything except for everything in the mission statement, which leaves talking, and that's only as long as Suze doesn't catch you leaving the approved script, so watch out for that banhammer. But besides that, a 24-carat success rate at the very difficult task of blogging, which most people, including me, do as a hobby. John, you realize you're being trolled, right? Shut up, RBK! And what we do is certainly worth considering, this is the article again, because it is, as far as I'm concerned, a remarkable first in human history. It is a magnificent feat that I will always take pride in for myself and for the community of MHRA badasses who frequent and volunteer for this operation. You know what? I have to give credit where it's due. Nobody in history has ever sat around and griped and complained from the position of powerlessness, ineffectually, against a majority they disagreed with. Yep, that's never happened before. And it's important to write down the date and the time of this, the first time that it's ever happened. The article continues. saying that challenging 3 million years of human evolution with both socialization and biology screaming at men to submit to gynocentrism with their heads down and their mouths shut is a hell of a thing to take on. Okay, I'm not going to argue with that. It is a hell of a thing to take on. Which I guess is why the site's stated goal, as of this article from Paul, is to abandon the entire mission statement and stand strong on the very difficult task of being a blog, talking. According to Paul, it's like trying to scale Mount Everest barefoot and in shorts and a t-shirt while chain smoking and chasing down Valium with Jack Daniels. Aside from this being not much more than just more hyperbolic filler material to bulk the article up, the mention of chain smoking and chasing fistfuls of Valium with Jack Daniels sounds like it might be self-referential. If anybody remembers the BuzzFeed article from Adam Serwer, it looks like Paul is talking about his own past. But he continues, we are in fact the first movement ever to coalesce in opposition to gynocentrism. But he says gynocentrism is the root of all gender roles. All that we ever need to succeed at that is the courage to speak up about it in a world insanely hostile to our doing so. What he means is the courage to maintain a blog. Yeah, good job. But what about all that money that AVFM raised year after year? So, what we aim to do here is talk and make it acceptable for men and women wherever they go to say what is on their mind and stand behind it with agency as the world goes bonkers on them. Oh, I get it now. I understand. Okay. I was critical, and I was, suspicious, and I was skeptical, and I thought this was all a big pile of hooey. No. AVFM is a place for people to speak their minds. Unlike, the rest of the internet. Except for the slightly inconvenient fact that anybody getting a little too impolite at A Voice for Men will get the banhammer from Driver Suze. John, for Christ's sakes, you're being trolled, you idiot. Shut up, RBK. Just shut it. Paul continues, saying, the rest of it, the change, will come at some point. All by itself. So the thing Paul is congratulating himself for is going to happen at some point. Maybe it's bashful, this change. Maybe the job of the site is to create a diversion, a distraction, so that the change can slip in undetected. And he next says, and even if it doesn't. So, it might happen and it also might not happen. That's what I call confidence. But even if it doesn't, we can still create a subculture of men and women who can largely insulate themselves from the insanity we call modern culture. I think he's talking about men going their own way as a phenomenon again, which is odd, because he took an awful shellacking the last time he tried that. But he adds to that the modifier that they can do that, quote, without turning them into hermits or celibates. Of course, he cannot let even a backhanded mention of MGTOW pass without a jab that the non-AVFM MGTOW community are dysfunctional and sexual failures. John, you're being trolled. I know, RBK. I know. The article continues. We are already doing that. In fact, once again, I get to blow the AVFM horn. A lot of other people are starting to do the same thing because the good people here made it possible. A lot of people are blowing the AVFM horn. Really? Well, I know the site is getting some high-profile attention lately, but I've read those articles, and they were not good for the site. I don't care who says otherwise. Looking like a homeless man with a cardboard sign is not good for your business. Indeed, as we watch the article continues. And indeed, as we watch the gynocentrists melt down all over the world over one little old website, I would say they made the point pretty well for us. We are doing what we set out to do. Except for all that stuff in the mission statement, which this article tosses out the window. And he continues out, you're welcome, now shut up and get out of the way. Now, my comment here is I don't think anyone in opposition to AVFM or to the men's movement actually wants to stop Paul. Even those who care about men but disagree with the approach being pursued by AVFM and Paul, and who wish that he would go away, they actually now think that he is doing exactly the right thing right now in this article. So, Paul, by all means, please do continue in your present course. Paul continues by saying, seriously, I want to plead with our excruciatingly concerned brothers and sisters who come here to tell us how we ought to be talking, writing, commenting, thinking, proceeding, planning, structuring, revealing, and scratching our privates. Please, please, let not your hearts be troubled. It's all going to be okay. Well, this is filler. And I think it's intended to be stylish, but it comes off as overplayed, and it ends up being boring, which is quite an accomplishment, because a real train wreck is usually quite riveting. Now he continues on saying, real social change is not legislated or determined by Nielsen rankings, nor by Alexa rankings, I will add. And this may be true, but it's a peculiar statement to make considering how much self-congratulation there is from A Voice for Men on their own Alexa ranking. John, you're being trolled. Shut up, RBK. Dude, I know I am. Paul continues, it is not approved or disapproved by the Southern Poverty Law Center. This is a non sequitur, and it's also filler. They are not fomented, nor are they broken at the ballot box. More filler. And they certainly don't hinge on your willingness to tell your parents you're an activist, even if you tell them you're nothing like that horrible Paul Elam. Even more filler. One of my jobs at the site, when I was there, used to be line editing. And I have to wonder, is nobody doing that anymore? Again, all you have to do is shut up and steer clear of the heavy lifters. This is the article again. What heavy lifting is this referring to? Again, all you have to do is shut up and steer clear of the heavy lifters. This article just annulled the site's mission statement. So what's left is talking, and even that's under the policing eye of a banhammer-wielding hall monitor. So the article goes on and says, that will not mean much to most concerned trolls, as most of their activism is confined to being PITAs in the comments thread of A Voice for Men. PITAs, he doesn't expand on that. The PITA abbreviation is used and likely means pain in the ass. Paul was a writer once, and a good one. I'm not sure what happened. The article continues, it will, however, ultimately affect many members of the Let's Sit Down with Feminists and Seek Their Approval Over Latte Club. I have to comment again here. It sounds like Paul is attacking himself in this sentence, because he has for a couple of years been toning his own site down and promoting as the new model men's rights movement guy, a young man whose cultivated persona is the nice guy. We're talking Sage Gerard. And some of the strongest criticism of A Voice for Men from other elements of the men's movement is that he's lost the plot on a road towards political correctness and mainstream acceptability. So, let's sit down with feminists and seek their approval over Latte Club. Paul, are you talking about Sage? Your own little golden-haired boy? John, you're being trolled. John, you're being trolled. Yes, RBK, I know. Paul continues, as A Voice for Men continues its commitment to, saying what we think the way we want to, some of the arm's-length men's issue pundits who have settled for a pat on the head, a paycheck, and gender feminism will find themselves with a few more challenges than they are used to. Because of a blog. Right? Is that what you're saying? The article continues, why is this? Well, because it is the natural result of actually having a movement instead of just a syndicated column and martinis with the intelligentsia. An actual movement which has just abandoned its mission statement, and which will now settle for blogging, without syndication, and with a clear lack of invitation to drinks with anyone of actual influence, provided, of course, those blog entries are not too threatening to anyone whose favor the blog's publisher is trying to woo. Keep that ban hammer at the ready, Suze. I'll bet she wishes she could ban people from the whole internet and not just her site. Paul continues, saying, I do get that there are some concerned trolls who are very sincere, those who are honest, who honestly believe we can overcome the human evolution that ultimately gave birth to feminism with tone policing the people trying to tackle it. I don't understand it for the life of me, but I get that it is real. This is a very confusing statement by Paul. Who gave the site's tone police officer and censor her operating instructions? Was it some other Paul Elam, or was it this one? At A Voice for Men, the only meaningful dialogue, this is the article. What I'm about to read you is the article. At A Voice for Men, the only meaningful dialogue is that which we have with each other. Let me repeat that. It's from Paul's article. He says, "At A Voice for Men, the only meaningful dialogue is that which we have with each other." Usually people call that an echo chamber, and they don't say it as if it's a good thing. The article continues, because when all is said and done, that dialogue is what is getting the job done. I have to ask, just even rhetorically, getting what job done? What job? The article dumped the site's mission statement out the window. It's like watching a very small child painting the walls with his own poop and then grinning while he holds up his hands in pride. Look! I personally, speaking for myself, John, have done multiple dozens of takedowns of articles. And I frequently used to do this for Paul on his site, debunking and mocking opponents of the men's movement. And I never, ever had anything handed to me on a platter like this before. Paul has taken himself down. All I'm doing really is adding a little bit of color commentary. I am amazed even as I read my own comments to you. But this article isn't even done yet. It continues. Quote, "When you think about it, it is remarkably simple, if not particularly easy. Gynocentrism has been protected by a wall of human denial for countless centuries. All that was ever needed to change the status quo on male disposability was for intelligent, passionate, and informed human beings who did not give a damn to step out of the shadows of fear and start talking." I have to say this is partly correct. Gynocentrism has been a permanent feature of human culture, and we are barely now awakening to the existence of it. And talking about it is certainly a part of the solution, but it's only a small part. It is also necessary to leave gynocentric social and legal conventions behind, to abandon those practices in our culture which reinforce gynocentric norms. Talking is a start, and it's important, but it is far from all that is needed. And even talking, claimed as an important goal, as an important activity, is a total fail on a site where a woman drunk on her own administrative power bans anybody who deviates from allowed script. So I'm genuinely and seriously amazed that Paul wrote and then published this giant mess of squirrel nest. John, you're being trolled. John, you're being trolled. Yes, RBK, I know. Thank you. The article again. "If enough of that happens," that's talk, "it will be very much like Dorothy Gale yanking back the curtains to find the reality behind the illusion." Oh, filler text with no meaning. How I love you. Back to the article. "So while we all here at A Voice for Men appreciate your concerns, we won't let you distract us from what's happening, and yes, I know that concerns you." And that's the whole article. Now, I could add something, some, snark here, but it's not really necessary, is it? I think this is Paul's resignation letter. I think Paul has left the building.